of the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat peoples to this land. We recognize all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who now call North Granville their home. We respect and support the need for cultivating a strong relationship with all Indigenous peoples, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and fostering the path towards reconciliation.
Thank you very much. So we'll look to then an approval of the agenda for this evening as presented, Council colleagues, and that agenda is before you. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Strachan, Councillor Sullivan, thank you. Any comments or questions on the agenda as presented? Seeing none, I will move on. Any disclosures of interest tonight, colleagues? That's in regards to any perceived or real financial benefit or loss arising from any matter. Seeing nothing, I'll move on. And then under delegations, we have two. The first is from Rotary International and the Kennel Rotary Club, and we were invited, Council, to consider a motion in regards to the continued eradication of World Polio Day in North Granville. So I have the motion before us. We do have some representatives of Rotary Club in the theater. Representatives, if you wish, I can read the motion and ask for a mover and seconder, and then should you wish to comment, let me know. Does that work? Yeah? Okay. So the proclamation, colleagues, is rather long, but you'll see that it says, whereas Rotary is a global network of neighbors, friends, leaders, and problem solvers who unite and take action, whereas the Rotary motto, service above self, inspires members to provide humanitarian service, follow high ethical standards, and promote goodwill and peace. Whereas Rotary in 1985 launched Polio Plus, and in 1988 helped establish the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, which today includes the WHO, U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, UNICEF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, to immunize the children of the world against polio. And whereas polio cases have dropped by 99.9% since 1988, and the world stands at the threshold of eradicating this disease, and whereas to date Rotary has contributed more than $2.4 billion in countless volunteer hours to protect nearly 3 billion children in 122 countries. And whereas Rotary is working to raise an additional $50 million a year, which will be leveraged for maximum impact by an additional $100 million annually from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And whereas these efforts are providing much needed operational support, medical staff, laboratory equipment, and educational materials for health workers and parents, and whereas, in addition, Rotary has played a major role in decisions by donor governments to contribute more than $10 billion to the effort, and whereas there are over 1.4 million Rotary members in 46,000 clubs throughout the world that sponsor service projects to address such critical issues as poverty, disease, hunger, illiteracy, and the environment in their local communities, be it resolved that the municipality of North Granville do hereby proclaim October 24th, 2022 World Polio Day in North Granville, and encourage all citizens to join internationally in the fight for a polio-free world. So, a very substantial contribution, certainly from the Rotary, and obviously a really significant international leadership. I'll look for a mover and a seconder for this motion, please. Thank you, Councillor O'Sullivan and Councillor Wilson. Thank you. Any questions, colleagues, in regards to this particular motion? Anything for Rotary at the time? Councillor O'Sullivan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's really just a comment that I think this is a fabulous initiative for Rotary to do this, and polio was a very devastating disease, and I have to put a plug in for immunizations and vaccinations because they work. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we take for granted the near eradication or eradication of certain diseases. So to see how involved Rotary has been is really quite impressive. So thank you for bringing this to our attention. Anything else, council colleagues? Seeing nothing, we have a mover and a seconder. So I will call the vote on declaring October 24th World Polio Day in North Granville. All in favor? Good. Thank you. That passes, and thank you both for being here, representatives of the Rotary Club. We appreciate it. Okay, so now we'll move on. Our second delegation this evening, before we transition into a committee of adjustment meeting, is our annual OPP 2021 report, and I believe Inspector Kingsley, you're here to provide an overview. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for having me. Prior to getting started, I just want to acknowledge the tragic loss of 2 police officers from the South Simcoe Police Service who were killed in the line of duty last night. It goes to show that nothing in this job is routine, and it's a very tragic incident in the province of Ontario. Tonight, I'll be presenting to Council the 2021 Police Service Report. So I recognize that we're 10 months into 2022, but all the data I'm going to be referring to tonight is going to be referencing 2021. For those of you who aren't aware of who I am, my name is Josh Kingsley. I'm the detachment commander. I started in Granville County in March of 2021, where I was acting, and I was officially appointed in late October, early November of 2021. So it's been a pleasure to work within the municipality, and I'm going to start presenting here. So if you can move, Jessica, to the first slide, please. What I'm going to be presenting is there's a full 25-page report that's going to detail the 2021 report. Tonight I'm going to be highlighting for you several slides, and then I'll be opening the floor to questions. Some of the highlights that I'm going to point out is in 2021 there was a downward annual trend for calls for service in violent crimes and drug crimes. We had some key cybercrime and street crime investigations. Continuing community concerns were brought to our attention regarding traffic safety, specifically speeding within the municipality. And we also had increased community engagement. If you can go to the next slide. When we look at our calls for service, I've highlighted the top 10 calls for service. These calls will represent approximately 54% on average of what the overall calls for service were. The top call for service within the municipality was traffic complaints, followed by motor vehicle collisions. And when we look at our top 10, you could see that there's police assistance, police information, alarms, thefts, traffic enforcement, 911 calls and hang-ups, property-related occurrences, and family disputes. Traffic complaints and motor vehicle collisions were a very close first and second. If we can go to the next slide, please. When we look at our crime unit investigated approximately 30 benchmark crimes. When we look at the 2 top benchmark crimes, out of those 30 benchmark crimes, 37% of those were sexual assaults. Sexual assaults have increased in reporting throughout the province of Ontario, and I attribute that to the increase in services that are currently available to victims of sexual assault. So there's a lot more supports for victims of sexual assault, which weren't there before. The second highest reported benchmark crime is sudden death. Now, those are occurrences that are sudden and unexpected deaths that occur outside of hospitals, where we're dispatched to investigate under the coroner's authority. Our crime unit has also participated in significant training. One of the primary training things that we focused on this year was a joint participation with Children's and Family Services, where we trained all our members in joint forensic child interviewing. Child interviewing is something that is a skill, and we're proud to say that all of our members have been trained in that. You can go to the next slide. When we look at our frauds, cybercrime investigations are increasing, and Granville County is no stranger to that. When I look into the numbers, there was 80 incidents of fraud that were reported in 2021. And one of the incidences that are going to be highlighted was a cybercrime or cybersecurity incident that occurred at the Kennel District Hospital. That required a significant police response, and we partnered with our cybercrime investigations team, our digital forensics team, as well as members from the Kennel detachment. We're very fortunate in Kennel where we have a subject matter expert who is a subject matter expert in cybercrime and blockchain and Bitcoin tracing. So we're able to do those partnerships, and through exploiting those partnerships, we developed quite a network, including the National Cybercrime Coordination Center, the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, in the FBI and the Secret Service in order to move this investigation forward. Now, the investigation is very much active into 2022. And as you can imagine, anything that is fraud related is very much digital traces. So we are continuing the investigation with an extensive amount of judicial authorization. So search warrants, production orders, both in Canada and internationally. So unfortunately, I can't give you the outcome of that investigation, but it is very much ongoing. If you can go to the next one. When we look at our community street crime unit, one of the investigations I want to highlight, this team is a partnership between Leeds, Lanark, and Granville. So we have members, detective constables from each of those detachments who form part of a community street crime team, and their primary focus is to target property crimes within those 3 communities. One of the investigations that started in 2021 was thefts of catalytic converters. Now, these crimes are very difficult to solve because there's no identifying markers on catalytic converters. So unless you can find the offender in progress, you can go to the hawk shops, the metal shops, the swap shops. There's nothing to identify a particular unit to a particular vehicle. So it's one of those crimes that takes time. This investigation started in early 2021 and was eventually solved in early 2022 by boots on the ground police officers. So we had a team dedicated to investigating this through gathering intelligence, conducting surveillance. It is a very labor-intensive investigation, and you have to catch the offenders in the act. So through surveillance and intelligence gathering, our officers were able to identify several suspects and build suspect profiles, start conducting surveillance, where we were able to solve 26 occurrences ranging from LNA County through Granville County, Leeds County, North Granville. So it was a significant impact, and these offenders remain in custody to this day. So very positive outcome. And although we weren't able to recover all the catalytic converters because a lot of them had been pawned for the precious metals contained within, we have done a lot of public awareness on these and provided people with crime prevention strategies to try to alleviate these crimes in the future. The positive thing I can say regarding this crime is since we have arrested the group that were responsible for this, we have not had a single catalytic converter crime occur in Granville County. So very positive outcome to this investigation. Go to the next one, Jess. When we look at our violent crimes and our property crimes and our drug crimes, we've had a decreasing trend. So year over year, violent and drug crimes have been trending downwards within the municipality. Property crimes remain approximately the same with a slight decrease. So when we look at the chart on the screen here, we can see that in 2021, we had 81 reported crimes, which is the lowest in since 2012. So we've had a decrease from 167 crimes in 2012 down to 81 violent crimes in 2022. You can go to the next page. Our property crimes are staying fairly consistent. The red line you'll see on your screen represents the average trend since 2012 to 2021. And although you can see a slight decrease, it's fairly consistent. When I look into the data, that is attributed to a lot of the increase that we're seeing in frauds. And frauds have been increasing province-wide, if not nationwide. And that is one of the reasons why in 2021, the Ontario Provincial Police joined forces with many other police agencies and created the Serious Fraud Unit, as well as the Anti-Rackets Unit to address these serial crimes which are occurring province-wide. They've also partnered with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre to ensure we can do fraud disruption. So whenever we can identify a fraud group operating internationally, the Canadian Fraud Centre has the ability to provide disruption techniques to try to stop at least that avenue of fraud from occurring again. You can go to the next one. Our traffic management unit, we initiated 302 ride programs within the municipality of North Granville, and we issued 1,390 tickets, so offense notices in North Granville. In 2021, we had a full implementation of the e-ticketing system, so electronic ticketing system. Prior to that, officers were writing tickets by hand. So now they're using technology to their disposal, which is reporting that information directly to the court system. And also it's speeding up the efficiency. So instead of officers having to write down their tickets, write down their notes, it's transferring that data immediately to the records management system, which is a more efficient use of the officer's time, which is allowing them to conduct increased patrol hours. In 2021, we introduced a second traffic management officer. Although all officers conduct traffic enforcement as part of their regular duties, our general law enforcement officers respond to all calls for service. And in 2021, we introduced a second traffic management officer whose sole responsibilities, other than priority calls for service, domestics in progress, and things of that nature, is traffic enforcement and traffic duties. So I'm proud to say that we've got 2 full-time traffic management officers, and we've also expanded on the equipment available to the officers. So in 2021, we acquired 2 digital scales, which allow the traffic management officers to weigh commercial motor vehicles or passenger motor vehicles to ensure they're not overloads. So on roads that you may have reduced load capacities in the spring, we're able to effectively gather that enforcement information and take the appropriate action necessary. Go to the next one. In terms of motor vehicle collisions, these continue to be reported to the Ministry of Transportation. When we look at the information, we have been trending downwards in 2015. So in 2021, we had 210 reported motor vehicle collisions. The number 1 cause for motor vehicle collisions within the municipality of North Granville is animal-related collisions. So that is something that's very difficult to control because it's not driver behavior. It is spontaneous animals entering the roadways within the municipal boundaries and people coming into collision with vehicles. Although that information is reported to the ministry and signage does go up in these high collision areas, they do tend to be the number 1 cause of collisions, closely followed by inattentive drivers, which is why our big 4, distracted driving, impaired driving, continues to be a priority for our traffic management team. In terms of our motor vehicle collisions, the month that sees the most motor vehicle collisions historically and in 2021 is late November and into the months of December. So we're going to be coming into our peak months. Luckily, those tend to also be where we capitalize on the municipal ride grants. So we have officers doing additional duties within the municipality of North Granville using the municipal ride grant funding that the municipality gets every year. You can go to the next one. In terms of community response, I'm proud to say we have 2 full-time community service officers. Those officers are also partnered up with what's called our mobile crisis response team. When looking at the data, there was a recognition that mental health calls and dealing with persons in crisis was always an ongoing thing, tying up police resources. So we were able to partner up and leverage our partnership with Brockville General Hospital in order to bring on a full-time nurse, which works with our community services officer. And that officer and the nurse are able to respond to live mental health calls, which would have otherwise tied up frontline officers doing proactive enforcement within the municipality. Furthermore, those officers engage with a lot of community groups, Connect Youth, the Kemptville District Hospital, bylaw seniors groups, and we also are doing presentations to the local schools. Now, there was and there still is a review regarding school resource officers along the province. So we have a very strong relationship with the schools within North Granville, and we are still engaged within the schools, but we do so on a requested basis. So we don't do a lot of proactive foot patrol through the schools unless it's requested, and that's just until the Ministry of Education and the Solicitor General decide what's going to happen with the school resource officer position. But in terms of our community services officers, in terms of East Region, Granville County is one of the detachments within East Region. There's 16 detachments in East Region, and we are the #1 detachment in the region which promotes our social media as well as our traditional media to get the information out to the community on what our officers are doing, what proactive efforts we're doing, and what reactive enforcement efforts are being done on our local roadways. So it's great to see. I find it very important as a detachment commander to keep the community informed on what's going on, and we do that through social media. In terms of partnerships, we have worked with community engagement groups as well as Meals on Wheels. We are engaged with most events that are occurring within North Granville. Last year, we were engaged with the Santa Claus Parade, and I'm very proud to say that the officers actually bring their family members out to these community events to not only promote police officer engagement, but recognize that it truly is a community engagement, and getting family involved is important because we are members of the community, and it's important that the people of North Granville recognize us as that, because the people are the police and the police are the people. So it's very important that we have that two-way relationship. In terms of the full report, it is available on the municipal website. And if anybody has any questions at any time, I'm more than happy to answer those. If people need to get a hold of the police, the information is there. I do want to highlight that people can go to opp.ca to report non-emergent calls that they feel they don't want to tie up the police comm center with. So traffic complaints, theft under calls, theft of gas, those kinds of things can be reported online, and an officer will be dispatched. If someone is ever feeling that there is an emergency, that they need police assistance, by all means, they are to call 911. But if they are looking for non-emergent police response, they can call our 888 number, so 1-888-310-1122, and that'll be answered to 24/7. No different if they attend the Kempville OPP detachment. There's a phone outside there for office hours, and that'll go immediately to our comm center. And if an officer's not in the detachment, they'll respond immediately to the call. Subject to any questions, I know it's very quick. That's the 2021 highlights.
Great, thank you very much, Inspector. And we appreciate you taking the time to present to us today. I'll look to council colleagues. I know that Councillor Barkley will be presenting the PSB 2021 report. But before we transition, is there any comments for Inspector Kingsley at this time? Yep, go ahead, Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Inspector Kingsley. I just have a question regarding calls for service. For the KDH cybercrime, the cost of that investigation, is that charged to North Granville, or is it charged to the Ministry of Health because it's a provincial institution?
No, that would be North Granville. It occurred in North Granville, so it would be to North Granville. But it would only be based on the billable hours of that one call. So regardless if the call takes 100 hours, 20 hours, 600 hours, it's based on the call for service billing summary attached to that call. Which on a fraud, I'd have to pull up the data. It will be on the Police Service Board reports on what the weighted hours are for all calls for service, but you would only be charged for the initial weighted calls for call hours, not the totality of the hours spent on the investigation.
Okay, thank you. And then, so the other question is calls for service on provincial highways like 416, are they charged to the MTO or are they charged to North Granville?
Those are charged to the province.
They're charged to the
Yeah.
province. Okay.
Yeah, so when it comes to duty locations, that's how it is decided which municipality bears the brunt. Anything on a 400 series highway or a provincial waterway has a provincial duty location, whereas if things are within the municipal boundaries themselves, those are done to the municipality's duty location.
Okay. I think that's it. So is there a plan for a new school resource officer, or is that still on your wish list, or?
Right now, we're waiting to determine what the provincial outcome of the school resource officer program is going to be. We do have 2 full-time community services officers, so anything that the school asks us to do, so we are still participating in VITRAs, so violent risk threat assessments at the schools, and any presentation that the school requests of us, we will still do. On a reactive basis until the school resource officer program is decided upon at a ministry level.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. So, Inspector Kingsley, just while we have you, we're hearing lots about mental health, right?
Yes.
Not a surprise to you. Interesting that you note that obviously the OPP in this area have been involved in some of those mental health calls, it sounds like, for a very long time. But
Yep.
we know that, from the youngest to the oldest of our residents, right? It came up in our youth summit, in particular, that certainly kids and teens, among others, are in urgent need of mental health supports, and often they're not available, or access is limited, or their waiting lists. When you think about the kind of calls that the detachment is getting when it comes to mental health, can you paint a bit of a picture for us in terms of what you're seeing?
Well, I don't have the data in front of me, but I can say many of the calls have a mental health element to them, either mental health or addictions.
Yes.
Have a linkage to them. The one thing I'm very satisfied and very happy to report is, although it will be in the 2022 report, we were successful in applying for additional grant funding to expand our mental health programming in 2022. So whereas in the 2021 report here, we did have one full-time mental health nurse partnered with our officers, we've since expanded that because the ministry recognizes that mental health is a large component of what police officers are being dispatched to when it's not really our primary area of expertise. So although we've done significant improvements in crisis intervention training and de-escalation tactics with police officers, now we have the mobile crisis response team, which is responding to these live calls for service. We are seeing people struggle with everything from, traditional mental health illness, psychosis, schizophrenia, all the regular ones, to also just stress, anxiety, which is causing confrontations amongst family members and disputes. So a lot of those non-diagnosed issues are relating to conflicts within families, either domestic related or family members, mother, father, and child, or cousin, or even when you're caring for an elderly parent. In terms of how many calls for service we're responding to, I'd have to look at the 2021, but it's a significant impact on police resources.
And just a quick follow-up, it's great news about that second nurse, right, that's
Yeah.
partnering with you. Does that nurse exclusively serve Granville detachment or Leeds and Granville? What's the...
So Leeds also has a full-time nurse. So if we look at Leeds and Granville, we have 2 full-time nurses and a part-time nurse. Currently, we're very fortunate on the Granville side. We have a full-time nurse working in Kempville detachment, as well as a full-time nurse working out of the Prescott detachment, which is our Granville County area. So we do have a full-time nurse dedicated with each of our community services officers 5 days a week.
And if you could use more, how many would you use?
What I would love to see
Yeah.
is if we had one partnered up with each platoon. So we have 4 different platoons,
Okay.
which cover 24/7 coverage. So if we were able to partner up a full-time nurse with a platoon to follow that rotation, that would expand the coverage and area of responsibility to not just be those business hours between Mondays and Fridays. That would allow us to have 24/7 coverage to all these mental health crises.
And presumably, in some cases, perhaps minimize police engagement and transition that person over to the appropriate health provider.
Yeah, because historically, we had long delays at the emergency departments or the Schedule I facilities. Having that nurse or that healthcare worker to help navigate those transfers to the proper agencies has been crucial in reducing our wait times in emergency departments to allow the officers to get back to proactive enforcement duties or proactive response.
Thank you. I think that's, thank you for articulating the value, because it's obviously there in spades. Okay. Anything else, Councillor Barclay?
Yeah, thank you, Inspector Kingsley. Just because it's the end of term of this council, I just wanted to thank you and the OPP for your service to this community. And I think since you took command of the detachment, we've seen better communication between the Police Service Board and the OPP and much more productive relationship. So I think it's due in no small part to your participation, your assume of command. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the kind words, and it's been a pleasure to work with the board and work with the council and the municipality. So not only the council, but also Public Works and all the other workers in the municipality. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we echo those sentiments, and it was great to see you and your kids in the parade last year, and we
And I'll
hope
be
to
in the
see
new-
that again.
I'll be in this year's as well, so.
Yeah, for sure. And we, of course, also recognize the good work of those community service officers that often are the face of policing in our community. But testament to your leadership, Inspector Kinsley. So thanks for coming this evening.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, council colleagues, I'll look for a motion and a seconder, I'm sorry, mover and seconder to receive the report titled OPP 2021 for information purposes. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Strachan, thank you. Anything else for Inspector Kinsley? So we can let him get back to the other work. If nothing, I'll call the question. All in favor? Good. Thank you for being here. Have a good evening. Thank you very much. All right. So just for those of you who are waiting, we're going to deal with the one other police-related matter, which is the report from the Police Services Board, which is very connected to the report we just received, and then we'll go into a committee of adjustment meeting, and then to the rest of planning matters. So, Councillor Barkley, are you
I'm ready to
providing an
roll.
overview?
Hopefully I can.
And we should remind people that you are the chair of the Police Services Board and have been for almost 2 years now?
Yeah, about 18 months.
18
I was going to
months.
do that, Your
All right,
Honor.
there you go. Over to you.
Yeah, so as the mayor said, I'm chair of the Police Services Board, and I've been chair since for 18 months or so. And I'm happy to present this brief report to council on the activities of the North Granville Police Services Board. Next slide, please. So just an overview. The municipality is required to provide adequate and effective police services, including these areas that you see up on the screen. Or no, we don't have it up there. Sorry. It's on my screen. Great. Crime prevention, law enforcement, assistance to crimes of victims of crime, and maintenance of public order and emergency response. We do this through an agreement with the Solicitor General for services provided by the Granville detachment of OPP at North Granville's cost. In 2021, and like Inspector Kingsley, this report just covers the calendar year of 2021. It's 10 months ago, so it doesn't really reflect what's going on right now, but there's not much change. In 2021, the following 5 members were constituted the Police Service Board: Don Sherritt, Bruce Harrison, the mayor, myself, and Deb Wilson. At this point, you might be wondering why it's taken 10 months to deliver this report. There's no fault of the OPP. They report to the Police Service Board on a monthly basis. It's usually a 2-hour meeting. It's quite detailed. So Don Sherritt and Bruce Harrison stepped down, and the province chose not to replace them as provincial appointees. So we were working with a 3-member board, which was a little difficult in terms of carrying out the work. And then when we appointed Deb Wilson to council, she had to step down, and we replaced her with Gregory Brown. So we've been under-resourced somewhat for this year. And we were waiting for the Solicitor General to announce the new detachment configuration. They said they would announce it in January of 2022. They won't be announcing it until November of this year. Next slide, please. So amongst the things that we deal with, we provide oversight, not direction, to the police services. We have a number of protocols and procedures. The one I'd like to highlight to you is the protocol for handling of resident traffic complaints. As the inspector pointed out, one of the, where are we? We're having trouble there. I'm following my screen, Jessica, so I'm racing ahead of everybody.
I think there's just a small delay.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, there's just some technical difficulties. So maybe read from your screen, Councillor Barkley.
Yeah, I'll read from my screen.
Yeah, great.
But I'm leaving people in the dark because I'm just pulling
I
highlights.
understand.
Okay, so yes, so the protocol for handling of resident traffic complaints, we were able to facilitate better and more direct communication between Public Works Department and the OPP through this protocol. It's one of the protocols that we managed to attack and revise. So one of the things it does is it helps the OPP to target their resources through getting traffic assessments, identifying exactly when and where people are speeding or excessively speeding. So that's been very productive. You can get documents regarding our policies and procedures on our website. We have monthly meetings, as I said, and Inspector Kingsley reports on performance statistics, crime statistics, and prevention initiatives, some of which you saw in his report. Let's go to number 5. So some notable achievements in 2021. Deb Wilson and I attended the Ontario Association of Police Service Board conference, and that was very informative, as she'll attest. Lots of great information and a better understanding, at least for me, of how the Solicitor General Office works, how the OPP works, etc., and the kind of support that the Ontario Association of Police Service Board provides. Lots of training and lots of information. Key part of our work in 2021, and it continues, is our Road Safety Community Partnership Program Committee. And that is a committee, it's a partnership between the municipality of North Granville, primarily the Public Works Department, the OPP, the Leeds, Grenville, and Lanark Health Unit, and the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. Their Public Works Department also plays a role, because as you know, we have a lot of county roads in North Grenville. So through a road safety grant that the Police Service Board, received, we were able to launch an awareness campaign devoted to the promotion of safe driving practices and road safety in North Grenville. So every month we had a different theme, and you might have seen ads in the paper. We also had social media posts, public service announcements, as well as radio advertisements. And if we go to the next slide, Jessica, I would love you to see some of this graphic work that our graphics department did in partnership with the Police Services Board. But a couple of key things that I would highlight is that being a rural municipality, we put out safety information on sharing the road and being patient with farm equipment. Different times of the year, you'll see large farm equipment traveling on the road. There's always the temptation to pass them, but it's important to share the road. The other interesting for some members of the public would be we also produced public awareness about sharing the road with horses and riders. This seems to be a community where there's lots of, there we go. Oh, I'm so glad we can show this part of it. Right, so there's some of the ads that was produced through the Road Safety Committee through funding that the Police Service Board received. And through our annual budget, we're continuing that program because I think it's very useful. The other, if you go to the next slide, Jessica, thanks. The other accomplishment we had was not dealing just with road safety, which is the #1 concern in this community, but we were able to finance public awareness about intimate partner violence and cyber fraud. These are two issues that I think Inspector Kingsley highlighted, and I think it's great that we were able to get those messages out. We also underwrote 2 bursaries for the North Grenville District High School and the St. Michael Catholic High School, as well as a Youth Center biannual award. This year, we're extending that to French language schools, which was an oversight, I think, previously. So we'll be providing bursaries to the 2 French public and French Catholic high schools. And that is, no, on we go, sorry. So traffic initiatives. These are some of the traffic concerns that were dealt with, that we brought to the attention of the OPP. There was more than these 4, but you'll see Pine Hill, Wellington Road, the Ferguson Forest Center, and Kettle Creek subdivision. Sorry, Jessica, if you can just go to the next slide. Thanks. Yeah. Were some of the things that were highlighted in our monthly meetings. That's basically it for my report. As I said to Inspector Kingsley, we've enjoyed a much more productive relationship with the OPP, better communication, and we found them much more proactive in dealing with some of the concerns that residents had. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, council colleagues, for Councillor Barkley on this one? So certainly, I think, Councillor Barkley, the road safety initiatives have been great. I think the work of the municipality is under consideration now for a provincial award or grant.
Oh, yes.
If I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. So I know sitting with you on the Police Services Board alongside our municipal appointee, Gregory Brown, we've had some good discussion about the impact of some of those awards. So I want to take this moment to thank you for stepping up and serving as chair. It's been it's a busy monthly agenda every time, so we cover lots of ground. So appreciate your time and investment in the PSB, and I think we're very hopeful as of the new year that we'll be able to, in fact, appoint some other members of the board and expand it well beyond the current 3. Typically, the mayor and 1 council member sits on the PSB, plus a municipal representative, plus some provincial appointees, from which we have not benefited since the departure of the former 2 provincial appointees. So it'll be great to see if we can expand that board. But thank you, Councillor Barkley, for your time.
Yeah, I should mention, I raced through that a little bit. I apologize, I'm not 100%. But, appended to the agenda is a 2019 survey that would be great for the next council to take up and do an additional survey. And that was the work of Don Sherritt and David Horn. And so we're really benefiting from that work. So that's part of the agenda package that you'll have. And also, I'd be remiss not mentioning Jill Sturdy, staff, who worked with Carolyn Lundy to create those graphic ads and get them out to the various media platforms. So they were essential.
Yeah, the partnership is key. Yep. Good. Okay, if there's nothing else, I will ask for a mover and a seconder so that council can receive the report from Councillor Barkley. Mover, Councillor Sullivan, seconder, please. Councillor Strachan, thank you. And that is that council received this report. So without further ado, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. Thank you. So now we're going to suspend our council meeting, and now that the delegations are over, and we're going to move to our Committee of Adjustment first, and then we'll go to other planning matters and other items on our council agenda. So we're transitioning to a Committee of Adjustment. And I can now declare the Committee of Adjustment open. If Ms. Wood, you're good to go? Okay. And we'll look for a mover and a seconder for the approval of the minutes from the August 10th, 2022 Committee of Adjustment. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Strachan, Councillor Wilson, thank you. Any comments on those minutes? Not seeing any. Okay, good. I'll call the vote. All in favor, please. Thank you. Next, we'll ask if there are any disclosures of interest. This is for council colleagues in regards to the applications. Any disclosures regarding Committee of Adjustment? Okay, wonderful. So now we'll hold a public meeting, and I think, Ms. Wood, are you ready to read the... Good. You'll read the rules of the public meeting. Thank you.
So the Committee of Adjustment will now hold a public meeting to consider application numbers A1022 and A1122 for lands located at 13 and 15 Alma Street East, being part lot 52 on Registered Plan 12, geographic town of Kempville, now the municipality of North Granville, to permit a new permit some, some decks in the backyard. I must advise that this meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with respect to the proposed minor variance application. If an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this public meeting or written submissions before the committee makes a decision on the proposed variance application, the Ontario Lands Tribunal may refuse to consider their objections. I, Debbie Wood, Secretary Treasurer, will keep a record summary of this meeting. Any persons who wish further notice of the committee's decision concerning this matter should give their full name, address, and postal code to myself following adjournment of this public meeting. Are there any people here for this public meeting? If so, could you please acknowledge?
So for 13 and 15 Elma Street, is there anyone here for this public meeting? Not seeing anyone? Okay. Great, so then I'll pass it over to Mr. Mosher, and he'll make the presentation. He's our Deputy Director of Planning. Go ahead, Mr. Mosher.
Thank you, Your Worship. If we could have the next slide, please. So the nature of this application is to permit a lot coverage increase for the subject lots. It's to request an increase from 35% to 43%. Nature of the application is primarily to facilitate decks to be constructed at the rear of the properties. However, when doing a review of the property files, it was found that the existing dwellings were already over lot coverage, so this is to seek relief for those. In addition, 15, we're combining two applications in one here, but 15 Alma Street East was found that it's constructed a little closer to the exterior side yard than would be permitted. However, when you look at the established building line setback, going up and down Alma Street and Dumbrill Street, it's found that other buildings are already closer. So this is just to formally recognize that situation as well. Next slide, please. This is the subject location. So it's 13 is on the east and 15 is on the west, Alma Street, and then Dumbrill Street going north-south. You can see that it's located within a residential area, and it is primarily residential first density zoning, although this property is R2. Next slide, please. So this shows the site plan, and you can see the dwellings as they exist, and then the proposed decks. Next slide, please. So again, it's a minor lot increase. Lot coverage that's being requested from 35 to 43% is consistent with more recent developments within the community. The proposed deck would comply with all zone requirements, and the proposed construction would not occur on any easements. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the established building line setback reduction for the exterior yard, it is consistent with the pattern that's established within the area, and there's no violation of site triangle provisions of the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. This one's highlighted. It's always a note to myself. So we didn't receive any comments at the time that this slide deck was prepared. We did receive some inquiries from neighbors following the publication of the notice. However, at the end of the day, there was no concerns or objections brought forward for the variances. We did receive a letter of no objection from Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, and internally departments indicated that because these are active building permit files, there's a need to ensure that, specifically for 13 Alma Street, that it adheres to the final lot grading and drainage plan. Next slide, please. So staff's recommendation is that the variances be granted for both 13 and 15 Alma Street to allow an increase in lot coverage for both, as well as a reduction in the exterior side yard setback for 15 Alma Street. In the opinion of staff, these are minor in nature, generally consistent with the official plan and zoning bylaw, and represent good planning. That concludes my presentation.
Good, thank you. Anything, council colleagues, in regards to this? So my only question, Mr. Mosher, is there a logic in potentially at some point updating our bylaws to allow for those larger deck sizes given what was mentioned in the submission?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, so this is obviously an older zone standard. The comprehensive zoning bylaw was updated in 2012. And what we're seeing more and more, especially with newer subdivisions, is developers asking for lot coverage values around 40 to 50%, and sometimes not even any lot coverage ceiling. So I think this is something that we've heard before, specifically from this council, and definitely there's a look that needs to happen. We continue to bring these non-conformance ones forward as needed, and hope to be able to bring updates to the zoning bylaw forward at a future date.
And would that be part and parcel of the official plan review in the forthcoming year, or is this a separate exercise?
It would be separate, yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, well, perhaps later in the year, depending who's around this table, that can be a conversation that takes place. Okay. Council colleagues, anything on this? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover and a seconder to approve as recommended. Thank you, Councillor Barclay, Councillor O'Sullivan. And I will call the vote on this particular matter. All in favor? Good. Thank you. All right, so then we will move on, Ms. Wood, to the second public meeting, and that is for 617 Slater Road. Is that right? Okay.
So the Committee of Adjustment will now hold a public meeting to consider application A1222 for lands located at 617 Slater Road, Lot 6, Concession 2, Geographic Township of South Gore, now the Municipality of North Granville, to permit the establishment of a pet grooming business. I must advise that this meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with respect to the proposed minor variance application. If an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this public meeting or written submissions before the committee makes a decision on the proposed variance application, the Ontario Lands Tribunal may refuse to consider their objections. I, Debbie Wood, Secretary-Treasurer, will keep a running summary of this meeting. Any persons who wish further notice of the committee's decision concerning this matter should give their full name, address, and postal code to myself, following adjournment of this public meeting. Are there any people here for this public meeting? And if so, could you please acknowledge?
Is there anyone here for the Pet Grooming Committee of Adjustment? Okay, thank you. So we'll go over to Mr. Mosher in regards to this report, and then we'll hear from any members of the public or the applicant. Go ahead, Mr. Mosher.
Thank you, Your Worship. If we could have the next slide, please. So this is an interesting request, only because it's slightly from the nerdy side of the Planning Act. Committees of adjustment have two kinds of powers. One is to grant minor variances, and the other is to provide interpretive relief, and that is an other power under the Planning Act. And you can grant applications where the use of land, buildings, or structures permitted in the bylaw are defined in general terms, and where, in the opinion of the committee, the proposed use conforms with permitted uses in the bylaw. Next slide, please. Subject property is the fifth one to the right of the intersection of 22 and Slater Road here. And if we can go just to the next slide, that'll show it a bit better. You can see this is a Google map aerial photo, and in the southeast corner of the property, that's where the dog grooming business would be proposed. So what the applicants are seeking here is that there are general home occupations that are permitted through the R1 zoning category, and one of those home occupations that is listed is like a hairstylist, and that a dog grooming business would be similar in nature from a general perspective to that use. The home occupation listed uses, it's not exhaustive in nature, but it doesn't say dog grooming, so that's why it's coming to the committee for relief here. The proposed business itself would occupy only 160 square feet of the dwelling. And when we look through the other sections of the home occupation provisions of the zoning bylaw, it would comply with all of those in terms of signs and business operation, that the individual who's conducting the business is a member of the home. If we could go to the next slide, please. So no additional construction or development would occur to the property. After being at the site, there's clearly an adequate spot where parking can occur for any patrons who would be visiting the business. And it is, the proposed use would be consistent with all the requirements for the home occupation general provisions section. Next slide, please. No comments were received from any neighboring property owners. A letter of no objection was given from South Nation Conservation, although they did note that there was a water course to the north on the property. No comments were received from Emergency and Protective Services and Public Works. And the health unit did note that there would need to be some compliance with the existing septic tank, but that matter doesn't really detract from the proposed use in the opinion of myself. Next slide, please. So we recommend supporting interpretive relief here. It's generally consistent with the official plan, and the impact to the neighboring dwellings would not be inconsistent with what's established with the neighborhood pattern. So that concludes the report.
Thank you. So is the person here wishing to speak to the application, or are you the applicant? You are the applicant. Okay, awesome. All right, so no one else but the applicant is in the room. Is that correct? I'm reading that right? Okay, perfect. All right. So, council colleagues, any concerns about the proposal? Any questions? Councillor Barclay.
Thank you. Through you, Your Honor, or Your Worship, sorry. I should know that by now.
That's okay. All good.
This is not specific to this particular application, but When we look at a home business, are there any restrictions or controls over parking? And the amount of spaces required? Or
Thank you, Councillor Barclay. And through you, Your Worship, yes. So through the home provisions, there's has to be for this category of home-based business at least an additional parking space available so that it's not pushing parking out onto the street or anything like that. So yes, there are parking requirements.
Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr. Mosher. Just for clarification, that the health unit noted that the proposed septic tank was currently undersized and required compliance. So are they needing to put in a new septic tank, or is this an existing septic tank? It said proposed. That's why I'm curious.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Your Worship. Yeah, it was identified based on the number of fixture units within the home, the number of showers, bathrooms, and other things like that, that the current tank would be undersized. So it's a matter of compliance that the individuals can deal with the health unit to find a way to achieve compliance. It's something that falls outside the scope of this particular interpretation question, and would be a matter that they would address with the health unit themselves.
Okay, so the applicant then would need to take care of this in order to proceed?
Yeah, in one way or another, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions, colleagues? Seeing none, I will then look for a mover and a seconder to adopt the resolution as recommended. Excellent, thank you, Councillor Strachan. Councillor O'Sullivan, I apologize. I can't see you, Councillor Wilson. I apologize. I'm trying to reach over my screen. Okay. Anything further, colleagues? Seeing nothing, I'll call the vote. All in favor, please. Good. Thank you. Now I see you, Councillor Wilson. All right. So I think we're close to concluding Committee of Adjustment matters. Time to adjourn. All right. And you need a motion to adjourn. Is that right, Ms. Wood? Okay. So, Councillor Wilson, would you like to move to adjourn Committee of Adjustment? And a seconder, please. Councillor Strachan, thank you. And we're moving to adjourn at 7:35 p.m. I'll call the question on that. All in favor of adjourning Committee of Adjustment? Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Wood, for that. So we are going to return to our council meeting now. So we've adjourned the Committee of Adjustment, and we're coming back to our council meeting. So I'm just going to put that back up. Onto the equation. Thank you to some of you for your patience. And moving forward, colleagues, we have a number of items under the consent agenda. Items listed on the consent agenda are considered routine or no longer require further discussion. Any member of council may request that any item proposed for the consent agenda be voted on separately. So, colleagues, is there anything for you? Yes, Councillor Barclay?
yes, I'd ask that J.1.1, the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee minutes from September 27th be pulled from the agenda and dealt with. Thanks.
Okay, I think, had that been anticipated? Not necessarily. Okay, so we'll make that adjustment. Ms. Workman? And then I was going to also propose that we pull the water pollution control plant scope change. And I know that Mr. Bro and our Director of Public Works is here this evening. So we'll pull 5 and 6, and we're left with 1 through 4. All good? Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would also like just to pull the flag, the courtesy flagpole, just so that we can highlight that information. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so then we're left with 1, 2, and 4, Ms. Workman. And I'll look for a mover or seconder for those remaining items to be approved under the consent agenda. Mover or seconder, please. I'm looking hands. Councillor Barclay, Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. I will call the question. All in favor? Good. Thank you. Okay, with that in mind, we will move on, and the first area we'll now deal with is courtesy flags. And Ms. Workman, would you have that information on courtesy flags?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. At the last meeting, Councillor O'Sullivan brought forward a notice of motion that 3 and 4 courtesy poles be added to the municipal building. I can advise that we have those poles in our possession, and they should be installed by the end of next week.
Very fast action on that one. Councillor Sullivan, any comments?
Wow, thank you very much. That's great, because I think it's important that the municipal flag is always present, and we've had more and more requests for courtesy flags, and now that the Every Child Matters flag is occupying one of those spaces year-round, I think it was obvious that we needed to have more space for courtesy flags. So thank you very much for the prompt action on that. That's fantastic.
Any action required now that you've advised us of?
Just to receive the report.
All right. So Councillor Sullivan, would you like to move receiving the report, please?
Yes, I will.
Okay, and a seconder, please. Councillor Wilson, thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? Good, thank you. So next we'll go to Public Works, where I know Ms. Dunlop or Mr. I said Mr. Bro, but I was mistaken. I really apologize, Mike. Mr. Finley.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship.
Not a problem.
Mike Finley, our
Yes,
Deputy
indeed.
Director of Public Works and Environmental Services, will be presenting the
Great.
report.
No, welcome, Mr. Finley. Thank you. So just a brief overview of the scope change.
Not a problem. Thank you, Your Worship. So the report that was brought forward to Council is in keeping with continuing with the construction of the Water Pollution Control Plan expansion. In July of this year, a report was given to Council identifying the benefits of having a single consultant perform contract administration, site inspection, and engineering record services, with J.L. Richards and Associates currently being the designer of record. Based on the direction of that report, Council was directing staff to negotiate with J.L. Richards to develop a proper scope for this work. Staff since that time have worked through a number of revisions to get to a scope of work that would include tendering support, the contract administration, site inspection services, as well as warranty closeout for this project. The cost to perform these works over the next 3 years is an upset limit of $2,492,168. This amount is within the approved budget, 2022 budget of just over $8.5 million. With this moving forward, the current schedule that we have is to look to tender this project at the start of the new year, with anticipated construction starting early next spring, pending approval. And of course, this is over a revised 24-month construction project timeline. This has changed since the last report that we had of a 32-month construction period due to some of the preliminary findings we've come across with the additional dewatering investigation and digester facility relocation work that's been done so far. So that is the conclusion of the report, but I'm happy, the report is looking for to approve J.L. Richards to perform this work through a scope change in their contract, and I'm happy to answer any questions that Council may have.
Okay, that's helpful context. Anything on this, Council colleagues? Good. Then I'll look for a mover and a seconder for Council to authorize the Director of Public Works or her designate to sign a contract scope change with J.L. Richards and Associates to complete tendering, administration, and site inspection. Councillor Barkley, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Strachan. Anything further, colleagues? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Good. Thank you. That deals with that, so appreciate your time here, Mr. Finley. So we're going to go back, and we have under planning and development, I understand, 3 public meetings, and to that end, I will read the mandated script for the first public meeting, and I believe that this is for 2445 County Road 43. Is that right, Ms. Martin? Okay. So this is a script I am required to read, so bear with us. This is a requirement of the province under the Planning Act. Council will now hold a public meeting to consider an application to amend the zoning on the lands located at 2445 County Road 43, former township of Oxford-on-Rideau, from rural to rural exception 68, temporary zone to permit the use of the existing dwelling on the property as an office building for a period of 3 years. I must advise you that this meeting is an opportunity to voice any objections or concerns. If an appellant does not provide oral comments at this meeting or written submissions before council adopts the amendment, the Ontario Land Tribunal may refuse to consider objections. Any persons who wish further notice of council's decision should provide their coordinates to our Director of Planning, Amy Martin, and anyone wishing to ask a question can do so after the presentation. Is there anyone here for this particular amendment? Okay, and are you, application, are you the applicant? Applicant's agent, indeed. Okay, so I'll pass this over to Ms. Martin and we'll direct any questions to you if required. Ms. Martin?
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll just go to the next slide. So the location of our first zoning amendment this evening is located at 2445 County Road 43. It is just west of the town of Kempville, pretty close to where the first phase of the Oxford Village subdivision will be constructed. Next slide, please. As you will see, the property, there is some agricultural activity that does occur on the property, but it's also, there's also an existing single detached dwelling located along the eastern side, about halfway back on the property itself. Next slide, please. So the property is 9.3 acres in size. It is designated rural as per our official plan, and it's zoned currently rural. Surrounding land uses include rural, agricultural, residential, as well as the future plan of subdivision being the Oxford Village subdivision. Next slide, please. So the proposed amendment being considered is to rezone the subject property to permit the use of the single detached dwelling as an office for the Oxford Village subdivision while it's being constructed. We're seeking a temporary zoning that would be in place for a period of 3 years. It is not intended to convert the dwelling for the long-term use as an office space. So it is the request for the temporary zoning would just recognize that temporary use for a period of 3 years. Next slide, please. In consideration of the application, we reviewed our land use policies. Starting with the provincial policy statement, we recognize that rural land policies support the development that is compatible with the rural landscape and can be sustained on rural services. So in this instance, there is no new construction that will be occurring. It's using the existing dwelling on site, and the services can be sustained, or the use can be sustained on the existing rural services. Next slide, please. This is an excerpt from our own official plan. So when we look at matters of rural commercial uses within the rural designation itself, there are a series of compatibility considerations that need to be taken into consideration. So this includes that the use must be appropriate for the proposed location and compatible with surrounding land uses. Access to uses will be carefully controlled to avoid creating any traffic hazards, so that's generally limiting the number of accesses. The use shall be appropriately screened and buffered. There's adequate off-street parking. Advertising and signage and outdoor storage of goods will be appropriately controlled, and the use will be placed in a separate zoning category. So in accordance with our official plan, staff are of the opinion that the proposed use meets the intent of the rural commercial uses, and reusing the existing single detached dwelling on the property is appropriate for the location. Next slide, please. We'll just skip to the next slide. So to date, no comments have been received from any members of the public or neighbors, and we received no objections from the health unit and from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. Next slide, please. It is staff's recommendation that council enact a zoning bylaw amendment to permit the rezoning of the property at 2445 County Road 43 from rural to rural exception 68 temporary to permit that temporary office use on the property. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Any questions or concerns here, council colleagues? I'm not seeing anything. Okay. So if there are no questions, I think we'll just proceed to the motion, if that's okay. All right. Oh, indeed. Right. We are in a public meeting, so we'll have to close the public meeting. Thank you. Okay. All right, if there's no one here to speak to this particular motion, then I will close the public meeting. There are no questions from council for the applicant, and there's no one in this room wishing to speak to this matter. Is that correct? I'm seeing that that's correct. So then I will close the public meeting, and I will look for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that Ms. Martin has provided. Mover and seconder, please. Ms. Wilson, Councillor Strachan, thank you. And I don't anticipate any questions, so seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor, please. Good, thank you. So that carries. So we'll move on to our next public meeting, and I believe that's for 235 Forbes Road, is that correct? Okay. So we are now holding a public meeting to consider an application to amend the zoning on the lands at 235 Forbes Road from rural zone to special rural kennel zone to permit the establishment of a kennel. As per the last meeting, this is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns with the proposed amendment. If an appellant does not provide oral comments or written submissions before council adopts the amendment, the Ontario Land Tribunal may refuse to consider objections. Any persons wishing more information can reach out to our Director of Planning. And if you'd like to ask a question, I'll invite you to do so after the presentation. Are there people here for this public meeting? All right, thank you. And we can invite you to make comments subsequent to the presentation if you wish. Is the applicant here for this meeting? No. Oh, is that right? Okay.
Sorry, Your Worship, the applicant has sent their regrets that they had a conflict that came up this evening.
Okay. So I'll pass it over to you, Ms. Martin, for the presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll go to the next slide, please. So our second application tonight is to consider a zoning bylaw amendment to rezone a portion of the property located at 235 Forbes Road to rezone it to special rural kennel to permit the use of a kennel on the property. As you see, the property is quite a large parcel within the rural area on one of our most western regions of North Granville. Next slide, please. As you'll see in the aerial photograph, the property is largely wooded, but there is a cleared area where it appears as if agricultural activity is occurring. The house is located quite substantially off the road, approximately 250 meters, and development in the area is rather low-density rural, and again, you can see some agricultural activity and quite a bit of forested land. Next slide, please. So the property itself is 296 acres in size. It's designated rural and provincially significant wetlands, which speaks to the large amount of land that is vegetated. It's zoned rural and environmental protection zone, and the environmental protection zone, again, is recognizing the wetlands that are on the property. Surrounding land uses include rural land uses, agricultural, residential, and forested parcels. Next slide, please. So the applicant provided their interpretation of where the proposed kennel will be located. So I will indicate that it is near the existing dwelling, so located quite far back from the roadway itself. It is the understanding that there will be 10 kennel runs associated with the kennel operation itself. Next slide, please. So when reviewing our planning policies, again, we look to the provincial policy statement, which provides that rural land support rural residential uses with home occupations and home industries being permitted. Economic opportunities should be promoted where development is compatible with rural character and can be sustained by rural service levels. So in this case, the proposed kennel is being located on quite a large lot away from other residential uses within the area and can be supported on the existing rural service levels. Next slide, please. In regards to the United Counties official plan, and it's consistent with the policies of the provincial policy statement, rural land designations promote limited development that is compatible with the rural landscape and can be maintained on rural services. It is not uncommon for kennels to be located within the rural area, and a special zone has been created as such. And as mentioned in the previous slide, a proposed use can be sustained on the existing rural services. Next slide, please. In regards to our own local official plan, it provides that residential development shall be located so as to avoid our natural hazards and to ensure that the impact on natural environments features will be minimal. So in this case, consideration was given to the proposed location of the kennel operation in regards to the wetlands, and the proposed development is located outside of the wetland itself and the buffer area. Next slide, please. So there have been comments received by staff. At the time when the report was submitted, comments hadn't come in. But I will provide a summary, and just for the record, all comments that were received by staff were circulated to members of council for their consideration ahead of the application. And I'm certain maybe some members of the public who are here tonight will speak to the concerns that they provided. So we did receive 5 letters of objection from mostly residents within the Forbes Road area. And a summary of the concerns, so that reading out every letter, pertain to noise. There are too many kennels already existing in the area, increased traffic and existing road conditions, increased strangers in the area, potential for the kennel to become a larger commercial enterprise, and impact to agricultural land, so the loss of the land to accommodate the kennel. We did receive an update from the property owner, who did respond to the comments provided to her from the members of the public, and she provided some additional information as to who she was, as well as to the intent of the kennel, and she is a breeder of Rhodesian Ridgeback dogs. So the intent of the kennel is to have, again, approximately 10 kennel runs, and it's primarily to provide boarding services to the individuals of whom she sells her dogs to. She would also like to offer some dog training classes as well on the property, and anticipates there'd be 1 to 3 classes over the 4 to 5 day week period, and it would be no more than 5 dogs per class. She did send her regrets that she could not attend tonight, so this is a recorded meeting. She can always go back and watch the comments that are received, but a summary of the comments received will also be provided to her. If we go to the next slide, I believe that ends my presentation, but it is staff's recommendation based on our land use policies that the application be supported to rezone a portion of the property to support a kennel. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. I appreciate it. So now I'll look to council colleagues. First, any questions for Ms. Martin before we hear from members of the public? Councillor Strachan and Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Martin. I have a couple of questions and one statement, I guess. One is, are we able to limit the size of the kennel to, I guess, resolve one of those questions that's come regarding the bigger commercial enterprise concern? And if it's 10 that's intended right now, is there a threshold that could be placed on the size of the operation at this time?
So the kennel provision is just very general. It would allow for just the use of the property as a kennel. You can become as restrictive as you want from the zoning process in dictating that, a kennel with so many runs. I don't think the intent here is to become a large kennel. She is a breeder of dogs. So that's part of the consideration as to seeking that kennel designation as well.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, I live on one of these kinds of roads where it ends in a dead end, and when people do come down that road without knowing where they're going, sometimes they do drive a lot faster than what the residents would because they're more familiar with the road, but not always. So I guess more of a statement, because I guess it's not part of this process, but something that may be a consideration down the road that we would want to be aware of this, that if there's ways to help mitigate people speeding if it becomes an issue. So more of a statement, not a question for you. And then the last statement that I have is, I am a dog owner, so we've used kennels before, and I guess to respond to the statement about competition, there is a shortage of kennel spaces, and a lot of times part of that is just due to a lot of people having dogs, living in a rural setting, but COVID also, there's a lot of COVID puppies, and anybody who has a dog right now knows that if you want to get a dog in a kennel especially during peak seasons, holidays and so on, you do have to book them in advance. So I'm not sure, I don't think, from my own personal experience again, that the kennel competition concern would be raised by other kennel businesses because they are already maxed out typically. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So anything else? Oh, yes, Councillor Sullivan, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Ms. Martin. So there was a comment about too many kennels already, and sort of a different angle than Councillor Strackeryan has brought forward. Is there a limit on how many kennels we can have in North Granville?
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. So we do not regulate the number of kennel license in which we can issue in the municipality. I did follow up with bylaw prior to the meeting because that was a question that had been raised in just regards to the number of kennels. So we do issue kennel license for two reasons. You do have individuals who exceed the number of dogs that we permit through our animal control bylaw, so they'll get a kennel license just to allow for them to have more dogs on their property. And then you do have those that are operating as a kennel, providing a service to the public. We do have 10 kennel licenses that we've issued this year. Not all of them are active as providing that service for the public to board their dogs there. And I reviewed the list, and there are 2 kennels existing within the area, but they're at least 6 kilometers away from this location. I can only speak to North Granville's context because that's the information I have. I am aware that there are also some kennels just on the Merrickville side because this property is closer to Merrickville that also operate, but I wouldn't have those metrics just because I can only speak to the North Granville context.
Okay, thanks very much. And then the other question is, there was comment about noise. Would bylaw be involved if there's excessive or unreasonable amount of noise, or how would that be dealt with if that happened?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Sullivan. Yes, we do have a bylaw in regards to animal control as well as a noise bylaw, which would speak to the excessive barking of dogs.
Okay, but thank you. Now I note that this actual property is 59 times greater than the requirement, the minimal requirement that's required. It's 296 acres versus 5. So the 5 acres, is that for a limit of a certain number of dogs, or does it matter?
So the 5 acres is establishing enough land that, because from a kennel perspective, that there's enough distance from neighboring land uses, so you don't have a kennel, in an urban area adjacent to, 10 or 11 houses. Right. It's meant to provide the space that they need to mitigate any of the potential concerns that could arise, including noise, space for the dogs, for the kennel runs themselves, but it's just creating more of that land use compatibility separation.
Okay, thank you.
So if there's nothing else from council at this time, is there any person wishing to speak in opposition? All right. You'll have to come to the mic. Thank you very much. If you just push the middle button, then your mic will be on. All right, awesome. And if you could just let us know your name and address, please.
Really?
Yeah.
Doug Jackson, and I live at 550 on the Bolton.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now, this here, she's going to be a breeder. Where's all this crap going to go? Where's she going to wash the dogs? Where's all the urine going to go? In the wetlands? You got to realize, the more kennels you get around our place, you're devaluing our farm down to basically nothing. We've got 3 kennels around our farm. We got a commercial body shop around there. We got a friggin' cesspool across the road. Now we're just getting devalued here like you wouldn't believe. And is this here, they got a bylaw They're supposed to be back 30 meters from the fence line or whatever. Was that on top of the buffer zone of the wetlands? Because there's a 30-meter buffer zone there. And she's bumping up against the provincially significant wetland. Is that place going to be all fenced? I mean, is she going to let the dogs run loose? How many buildings is she going to build? Because she can't use the barns that's on the property now. They must be falling down by now, you know? And the more dogs, we're not going to have peace. The dogs are going to harass the wildlife. If there's an outbreak of rabies or a parvo, are we going to be notified, or is it going to be swept under the rug too? If dogs are loose, that means I have to neutralize the problem. If there's a problem, I have to neutralize it right away. That puts the work on to me instead of somebody else. You got to realize you're right on the wetlands here. It's just, I don't understand, but it's, I need to know, like, how many buildings she's going to build.
So maybe we can just ask Ms. Martin, what level of specificity is proposed in the, should the rezoning be successful, are those details made available to the municipality? And
Yes, Your Worship. So our zoning bylaw requires that they go through site plan control. It's my understanding that there would be, one or two buildings associated with the kennel use, including the outdoor runs. The runs would be fenced in themselves. To address the wetland question, they are outside of the 120-meter buffer of the wetland. They're not. The proposed operation is not located adjacent to. There is some separation distance between where the wetland and the boundary is located, and you can see that in the aerial photography as to just how the land's been developed. So they're keeping it closer to the house and not near the wetland. That was one of the questions that Rideau Valley had raised when we first received the application, and we reviewed it with them and determined that they wouldn't be impacting the wetland itself because they're building away from it.
You get a lot of dogs here, you're going to have a lot of dog crap. What you going to do, just throw it out anywhere? What you going to do to the crap, just throw it around? You got to realize what you're going to do. When you wash the dogs, where's it going to go? Just on the ground? Because you're going to wash them. If there's a breeder, you're going to wash dogs. You're going to have to wash the dogs. I mean, you're just going to let it run in the ground? We've already got two wells spoilt because of a cesspool beside our house. What more do we need? I mean, Jesus, you're ruining the whole area. And you might want to check to make sure that driveway that's going into the 235, it could be a road allowance. The driveway that's used now could be part of Bolton Road road allowance. From what I was
Ms.
told.
Martin, can you confirm what the property configuration is there?
I would have to confer with Public Works in regards to the driveway itself, but it does come off.
That there is, from what I've understood from years ago, that driveway is where the actual Bolton Road should run. That's the Bolton Road road allowance. Okay. Bolton Road, where it is now, is not a road allowance. It's a given road. From where Bolton Road meets the, what do they call it, Scotch Line Road. Bolton Road is supposed to go straight through. It goes up to Scotch Line a little ways, over the tracks, and down Bolton again. Well, that's a given road. The Bolton Road line should go right straight through, from 43 right through down. But it's a given road now. It's a given road.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Doug. Is there anyone else wishing to speak against the application? Okay, can we invite you down as well? You'll have to take the mic if you want to oppose the application.
I have to what?
We're just inviting the other person in the audience. Is there anyone else wishing?
You want to talk?
Okay, thank you, Doug, for making your comments known. We appreciate it. And is there anyone else wishing to speak in opposition who's in the room this evening? No? Okay, thank you. And just name and address, please.
Name is Zach Jones, 1632 County Road 43.
Okay, hi, Zach.
Hi. So a few things. Just going off of what the last gentleman said there about wetlands, we all know that wetlands are lowlands. So if you put soiled feces or anything just up the road, it's always going to go to the wetlands. It's lowlands. It doesn't matter if it's 100 meters or 200 meters away, it's going to go to the wetlands. Furthermore, does the council have any building plans for this kennel, or do we put dogs in old outbuildings, or do we have some type of code for what a kennel is, or?
We can certainly ask Ms. Martin that question. Ms. Martin?
The structures would be regulated by the building code based on their size. I don't believe the intent is to build a small shed to store them in. It's going to be a proper kennel building. Kennel licenses in North Granville are required to go under an annual inspection in order to get their kennel license from bylaw services. So we do inspect them.
Okay. But like the heat sources and drainage and all that will be into the kennel permit, or?
Sorry, drainage and what else, sorry?
Like heat sources, radiant heat flooring, AC, air ventilation.
I would have to verify with bylaw services exactly what parameters that they do inspect as part of that process. I'm not intimately aware of that inspection process for kennels, but we do have an inspection process that I can provide to you.
Okay, thanks. And Councillor Christine, is it? Yeah.
Kristen Strachan?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I actually own a dog kennel and in the area. I own Pet Zones, and I'm here on behalf of some other dog kennels in the area. You mentioned that there's a need for more dog kennels, and I bought this place about a year and a half ago. I've been saving up for 25 years to buy a dog kennel, and COVID presented opportunities to buy dog kennels. There's lots going up for sale because of the lockdowns. People weren't traveling. And I bought it kind of right in the middle of that. And I staff 10 employees. Through busy times, we staff up to 15 employees. And for the year and a half I've been in operations, a good year of that was struggling. We were losing money, and we were very slow. And I know other kennels in the area were dealing with the same issues, hence why a lot were going for sale. Someone else mentioned that there's about, and I think there's 5 kennels you guys probably know about, but I mean, there's lots of small home kennels as well that go to your house. Maybe you drop their dog off at their place. So there's more than enough, I think, in the area. And then on top of that, you're right, we do get busy on holidays and in summertime, but I'd say us, not just us, but other kennels alone, I mean, 80% of the year, it's pretty dead. So you're gonna add another competition in the area, and not just for the existing businesses that are in place that might struggle, but I mean, there doesn't seem to be a lot of parameters of limits on, I'm gonna start with a 10 kennel basis, and then maybe 2 years from now, I'm gonna add 30 more runs. So again, we don't need a Tim Hortons on every corner. Just because we live in a rural area, we don't need a dog kennel on every corner. Yeah, that's kind of my point of view of the whole situation, and kind of where I stand.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it. Okay. So Ms. Martin, is there anything else to add on your side?
I'd just like to reiterate that our zoning bylaw does require site plan control. So some of the elements, I can't speak to the competition piece, but in regards to building location of the runs, we can provide some consideration through that process.
Okay. Council colleagues, anything else in regards? Oh, thank you, Ms. Wilson. Councillor Wilson, thank you. Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Martin. So this kennel that wants to be established, this is a breeder kennel?
Partially, she would also offer services.
Services for
the public to
to bring their dogs in.
That is correct.
Okay.
It is her intent, based on the information she provided, is that it's a service that she would like to offer to her clientele, so the individuals who are buying her breed of dog that she breeds. But it wouldn't restrict her to just serving those people. It would allow her to serve the general public at large as well if they needed boarding services.
Mm-hmm. And second question, if I may, to your knowledge, or to anyone's knowledge here, are the kennels that are currently in the area, are most of those also breeder kennels, or are they just kennels that people bring their dogs when they're away on vacation.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I think there's, as I described earlier, there's different reasons as to why people get kennel licenses. So within North Granville, I reviewed the list of kennels. We had the 10 licenses that we have and discussed with bylaw services, and the 2 that are located within 6 kilometers aren't active kennels for the boarding of dogs. There are individuals who've kind of long-standing just maintained a kennel license, past breeders, individuals who have more dogs than the bylaw permits. So I can speak to the North Granville context. I'm aware that we are close to Merrickville, and I wouldn't have the metrics in regards to the kennel licensing and who's operating where with, beyond the boundaries of North Granville.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Barkley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of comments. While I appreciate the struggle that some business owners have had during COVID or establishing a new business, I don't think the municipality wants to be in the business of limiting the number of Tim Hortons that we have, etc. I don't think that's our role. But there are some concerns about feces and drainage being so close to a significant wetland. And I think we need more information from bylaw about provisions or restrictions on kennels in terms of buildings and as Zach brought up, how the kennels are heated, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering if we couldn't defer this until we get some more information about bylaw, et cetera, and the site plan control, whether it includes drainage.
Okay. So is that a motion to defer, Councillor Barkley?
Yeah, I guess
I'll
so.
look for a
Thank you.
second to that. Councillor Wilson? Okay. I too think it would be beneficial to get some more information. I frankly would also like to see the applicant. This is really about relationship building, and if the applicant isn't here and can't speak in more detail to the application, I think the motion to defer from my perspective makes sense. So we have a mover and a seconder, and I'll look for any final comments. I guess I should close the public meeting. I apologize. So before that, I call the vote. I'm going to confirm no one else wishes to speak at this time. Is that right? Okay, good. So then I will close the meeting. Meeting is closed at 8:15 p.m. The motion to defer has been moved and seconded, and I'll call the vote. All in favor, please. Okay, good. So, indeed, Mr. Dyke.
For clarification, time and place for the return of the deferred motion?
I think it's early in the new year. Once council elections are over and whatever configuration of council convenes itself at this table. So I'd invite our planning staff to get some of that information for the renewed council at the end of the year into early next. Thank you. All right. So I believe we have one more public meeting. Is that correct? On we go. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Appreciate it. So next, this is in regards to concession 6, lots 22 and 23. And this is that council will now hold a public meeting to consider an application to amend the zoning on the lands located at concession 6, lots 22 and 23, former township of Oxford-on-Rideau from rural zone to mineral aggregate preservation zone to permit the consolidation of retained lands within the adjacent agricultural land to the east. Obviously, this is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns. With respect to the amendment, you must do so before council makes a decision. Any persons wishing further notice can certainly reach out to our Director of Planning. Is anyone here this evening for this application? I'm not seeing anyone. Is the applicant in the room? Not seeing the person. Okay, so no applicant and no members of the public. So then we'll pass it over to Ms. Martin for a presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll go to the next slide, please. So the property is located between Beach Road and McGovern Road in the rural area of the municipality. It is a large land holding, and it's also subject to consent, so an application for severance. Next slide, please. The official plan designation is shown just to demonstrate the location of the mineral aggregate reserve that has been identified on the property. As a condition of consent, it was required that the applicant apply for a zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the area where the mineral aggregate reserve is to the mineral aggregate reserve preservation zone. So it's just recognizing that the reserve is there and protecting it against future land uses. Next slide, please. So the total area of the land is around 180 acres in size. Its property is currently designated both rural and mineral aggregate, and it's currently just zoned rural, so there's no zoning recognition of the mineral aggregate. Surrounding land uses include rural, agricultural, and residential, and some forested areas. Next slide, please. So the proposed zoning amendment would rezone a portion of those lands, as demonstrated on the map earlier, from rural to mineral aggregate preservation. So again, just recognizing that the aggregate resource has been identified on the lot, and this would help preserve the aggregate. So there's no, just to recognize and prevent that future encroachment into the resource. I want to state that the zoning does not permit an aggregate pit or quarry as a right. So in order for anyone to establish an aggregate operation on the property, they would have to go through the full rezoning process to establish such. So this zoning itself would not establish that use. Next slide, please. In regards to our rural land policies under the provincial policy statement, it supports the management or use of resources as well as our agricultural uses and residential lot creation where it is locally appropriate. Section 2.5 of the provincial policy statement requires that mineral aggregate resources shall be protected for long-term use, which is the intent of the zoning bylaw amendment. Next slide. In regards to the county's official plan, it promotes limited rural development that's compatible with the rural landscape. Policies within the county's official plan also support the preservation of agriculture in accordance with the provincial policy statement. Next slide, please. And in our own municipal official plan, we provide policy guidance for mineral aggregate resources, and it is our policy on lands within the mineral aggregate designation, which are not zoned for a pit or quarry, to be placed in an appropriate zone category, which will protect the lands from any incompatible land uses. So again, we're just trying to recognize and preserve that resource as to where it exists. Next slide, please. We received no comments at the time of the report being submitted for council's consideration. There were no objections from the Conservation Authority or the Health Unit. We did receive a phone call from a neighboring property owner who was looking to inquire as to what the intent of the zoning amendment was for. The individual was satisfied with the answer that was provided by municipal staff. Next slide, please. So it is our recommendation that council enact the zoning bylaw to permit the rezoning of a portion of the property at concession 6, part of lots 22 and 23, from rural to mineral aggregate preservation. Thank you.
Can I just ask who initiated the application?
Yes, it was Golden Triangle Farms.
Okay.
So they own quite a few pieces of farmland within the area. So they are severing off, I believe, the house at the front. And as a condition of that consent, we've asked them to just recognize the mineral aggregate designation.
And to be clear, there was no objection to that reclassification of those lands?
The consent went through with no objection. So we do have a notice of decision from the counties, which this is one of the conditions they have to satisfy in order to fulfill their consent.
And the owners of the property did not have any concerns?
No, they did not have concerns.
So they're amenable to this proposed use or the proposed consolidation of lands, however you wish to characterize it?
That is correct. The intent is to continue to use the lands for agricultural purposes, which the mineral preservation zone would still allow for.
Okay, perfect. Anything else, council colleagues, in regards to this? No, we're good. Okay, so then we're in a public meeting. Is there any, I'm sorry? Okay, are we good? I want to confirm there is no one wishing to speak to this? Nobody? Okay, so then I'm closing the public meeting at 8:21. And I will ask for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that Ms. Martin has provided. I will spare you from reading it. It's right in front of you. I need a mover and a seconder. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Sullivan. So with this in mind, I will call the vote for the consolidation of the retained lands with the adjacent agricultural land to the east for the property as described within the township of Oxford-on-Rideau. All in favor? Good. Thank you. That carries. So with that in mind, I've lost my place on the agenda. I think we have now completed all public meetings. Amy, is that right? And we are simply now going to the matter of the Arts and Culture meeting minutes. Councillor Barclay, and I think you were going to speak to that.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the last meeting of the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee was, we were running against the clock to get some of the work that this committee's been working on very diligently. I'm quite proud of what this committee has accomplished. It achieved and brought into policy our very first arts and culture policy. And one of the elements of that was the establishment of a arts development fund that all the members were very keen to see get in front of council. So what I'm asking council to pass the following resolution: that we receive the minutes of the September 27th, 2022 Arts and Culture Advisory Committee meeting, that council directs staff to review the Arts and Council Development Fund guidelines and amended application form. In the minutes, there are some amendments to the actual application form. And I just want to point out before I go to the next part of the resolution that they worked very hard in conjunction with staff to nail down the details of this. 3, that council carry over the 2022 budget allotment for the development fund of $10,000, and 4, that council refer the new arts and culture development funds to the 2023 budget. And I can repeat that for the clerk. And no, I can repeat that for my council colleagues if they
yes,
want.
could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted with some editorializing. The council received the minutes of the September 27th, 2022 Arts and Culture Advisory Committee meeting. They're in your package. That 2, that council directs staff to review the Arts and Culture Development Fund guidelines and amended application form. 3, that council carry over the 2022, that's this year's allotment, of the development fund equaling $10,000. And 4, to refer the new Arts and Culture Development funds to the 2023 budget. So that we're not specifying in that fourth part exactly whether it's $0 or $1 million. It's up to the next council to decide during the budget. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I'll welcome comments from Councillor Sarkian.
Through you, Madam Mayor, sorry. Councillor Barclay, I guess just to confirm, so I'm looking at the minutes here, there's $10,000 currently in the fund, correct?
That's right.
And we're asking to move that into the 2023 as a reserve?
No, it's automatically, it's a bit redundant, as the CAO pointed out. It will automatically be carried over into next year, the 2023 budget.
And that the $10,000 allocated for, or presumed to be allocated for next year, would not be penalized? I'm just reading off the minutes.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
So I guess I have 2 questions. One is the reason that there's still $10,000 in there was that there were no applicants, there was no interest.
No, we hadn't they hadn't finalized the application guide. They hadn't finalized the guidelines for the fund, nor had they ironed out all the details of an actual application form.
Okay, so there's $10,000 of this year's budget allocated that went unspent because they hadn't
Ironed out the
finalized their
details of how
own guidelines.
how to evaluate and
And then I guess as a comment that came up, I think last night during one of the debates, was a comment from Jane Couch Maloney about the funding for arts and so on. And I guess my perspective on this is relevant to this evening's conversation, is that at some point, one would hope that, you know, $10,000 isn't an ongoing requirement, perhaps, that there would be some sort of resiliency to this programming. I guess it's too soon to say this, simply because it hasn't been used yet, so we don't really know where there's a benefit from an economic perspective that wouldn't require taxpayer dollars to continue to fund. But that's more of a statement, just to follow up on.
Sure, and I think in all the discussions, and there was lots of discussion around this, and I'll defer to Councillor O'Sullivan. It was looking at emerging artists, young artists, so like seed funding, not for established artists or established events necessarily. So that was the idea behind it.
So new events such as funding that would have been requested for something like street piano or something like that, that this would have been an appropriate use of this fund because it was a new kind of event,
yeah,
right?
And
like
I think,
something.
yeah, it's a development fund. It's
right.
not an the intent isn't to fund the same event or the same artist, you know, on an annual basis going forward.
Okay. Perhaps a consideration for the future council is that when there are new events coming up, that this fund be looked at first for funding rather than in addition to this this fund as well. And I realize there's an application process, but so that it's not multiple funds for new events for the arts.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
If I may, the Arts and Culture Committee, really this was on their work plan. It's been a goal for a long time, but because they come from so many different disciplines, it's taken a long time to consider all the different factors that come into play for developing an artist, or for an individual to get funding for developing their skill or their art form. And I think it's more for the development of the artist, not so much an event. So I think there's a bit of a distinguishing factor there, that this fund is for the artist, correct? More than event.
Yeah, and certainly staff will be reviewing both the guidelines and the application form. But I think there's a certain amount of anxiety in the committee that unless they got this in front of council, you know, all their hard work would go for naught.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because it's been near and dear to all of their hearts, and it's just taken longer than expected to get the details all ironed out that were suitable for everyone and all the different disciplines within the arts.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I just add one more comment to that. So I appreciate, I mean, you were both advocates for that committee, obviously, because you were the council representatives, and so I appreciate that perspective. I guess my thoughts are to better understand where the funding is going to go, developing an artist versus what kind of event they're putting on. You can sort of mix the two up easily, so understanding where the guidelines are would be important for the future council to be able to make sure that, you know, that it's an appropriate use of funds. But I'm not against the proposal that's put out tonight, just a general comment on that. So thank you.
No, it's a fair question, and I think, you know, as the guidelines come back to council or you know, that could be discussed.
Yeah, so the guidelines are certainly not set in stone, but the request is being made. So that's my understanding. Okay. So with that in mind, are you moving that as a motion?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I would second that.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Any further discussion? I'm not seeing any. Good. I'll call the question. All in favor, please. Good. Thank you. Okay. So I think we're nearing the end. Ms. Workman, are we dealing with the bylaws this evening? I know there are 3 listed. I believe they've all been addressed.
That's correct.
Perfect. Any questions from members of the public? Hello, members of the public. Thank you for being here. Thank you. No questions from members of our community or the media. So then I'll go straight to confirmation meeting. And that is that bylaw 8622 to confirm proceedings of council on October 12th, 2022 be adopted and passed. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Strachian, Councillor Wilson. I'll call the question. All in favor? Good. And before a motion to adjourn, colleagues, it's been a pleasure. in this mandate of council. Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Strachan, thank you for motioning to adjourn, but thank you to all the staff, ones who've endured certainly us over the last couple of years, who may be new to the various roles they played within the municipality, and to my council colleagues, thank you for your hard work and dedication and capacity and enthusiasm to serve the community. It's been very well appreciated. So thank you everyone for your time. And good luck, best of luck in the next couple of weeks. I'll call a motion to adjourn. All in favor?